Well, here is one car that Cadillac just can't seem to ever shake. And it's a vehicle that actually isn't that bad of a car. In fact, by the later model years, it's actually a pretty fun little car to drive. And that is the Cadillac Cimarron. Introduced in the 1982 model year and continuing on through the 1988 model year, the Cimarron didn't sell to the projections that Cadillac had for it, but it actually sold halfway decently, kind of around 20,000 units per year each year. And it was effectively a J-car Cavalier for which Cadillac charged double the price of the Cavalier in order to obtain one. Now, the car did have a lot more standard equipment than a Cavalier, but nonetheless, it still was pricey for an entry-level car that effectively was based on an economy vehicle. And I have to say, like I mentioned before, the car, when it was first introduced in 1982, it really wasn't a great car. But by the way, none of the J cars were, because they all had a 1.8-liter overhead valve engine under hood that would last for just 1 year before it was enlarged to 2 liters, and it became a much more pleasant engine. The 2-liter, particularly the cast iron variants that were made through the mid-'80s, are actually decent little engines that'll last a good period of time, a lot better than the 1.8s. And the Cadillac Cimarron would eventually get a V6 under hood, a 2.8-liter V6, that made it actually pretty pleasant and fun to drive. Remember, during this time frame, that if you got a full-size Cadillac, even the big rear-wheel drive DeVilles and Fleetwoods and things like that, if you got one made after 1982, it was only propelled by a 4.1-liter V8 that made 135 horsepower, and a Cimarron had almost the exact same power and was a much smaller car. So it was actually a pretty decent, fun little car to drive. And beginning with the 1985 model year and continuing on through the Cimarron's conclusion in 1988, the car actually got some unique sheet metal, including a unique hood and front fascia to go along with the grille that gave it a better look than when it just started out as really a Cavalier that had a different grille, different wheels, a different interior. Now, people will say, well, GM was so stupid that they brought this car to market, and it really wasn't a case of stupidity. At this point in time, after the second oil crisis, Cadillac dealers were just begging Cadillac division for a small economy car to compete with other vehicles, overseas imports like the BMW 3 Series, and Cadillac just had nothing. General Manager Ed Kenner decided that with a year left before the 1982 production models were to start, that Cadillac would enter the J-car program of the Cavalier, J2000, later Sunbird, the Olds Forenza, and the Buick Skyhawk. And they did so late that really there was no time left to do anything aside from change those minor components. The Cimarron was actually intended to be an X car, and that would be on the platform with the Citation, the Phoenix, the Skylark, as well as the Olds Omega. But remember, at this time, when the car was being planned after the 1980 model year, the X cars were selling out. They had all the plants running full-time, and they had no incremental capacity, and thus the car was forced onto the J-car platform. Now, remember, like I said, this was not a choice of Cadillac division. They wanted something that was better, but they had to address the dealer body, who was just begging for something and threatening to leave the Cadillac franchise if they didn't get a car. So what do you do if you're a Cadillac general manager? You don't have time to introduce a new car. You got to get something to the market, and probably all that you can do at this point is just do the best you can, hope for the best, and correct it over time and make it better over time, which is exactly what Cadillac did. And like I said, by the time the latter Cimarrons rolled around, they actually were pretty decent cars. Now, as I mentioned, as the Cimarron went along, it got better and better. But one of the things that I want to talk about today is a trim package on the Cimarron many people don't know about, and that is the Cimarron D'Oro, or D'Oro. I don't know how the dealers were told to say it. But take a look here at this ad from late 1983. This was introduced partway through the 1983 model year. And for that period of time, through the end of the 1984 model year, if you wanted this package, you had to get the black exterior. And then notice if you got the, I'll call it D'Oro package, you had the gold wheels, a gold grille, along with surrounds, like the surround on the headlamps. You got the fog lights that I believe were also smoked glass. And it was, as the ad says, a sleek black Cadillac with a gilt edge. Ooh, the scent of leather everywhere, and those Cadillac touches everywhere. A very special edition Cimarron D'Oro for 1984. Well, I don't know how many Cadillac touches there really were on the J car, but you certainly got some interesting things. Like I said, you got these gold exterior items, even the little Cadillac badge, which you can't quite see on the top of the header panel there. You'll see this little round medallion. That's what that is. That was gold, and you had to get a gold interior initially as well. And don't forget that with the 1984 Cadillac Cimarron, there was not yet a V6. There was just the 2-liter 4-cylinder underhood. So you had to make do with a 90-ish horsepower 4-cylinder underhood in the car. You have to wait for the 125-ish horsepower V6 to come 1 year later. So your D'Oro had a lot of glitz and trim, but not a lot of extra muscle, or really no extra muscle under hood. And here's a little bit better picture of what the D'Oro looked like, the entire car. I actually think it looks pretty good with the black wall tires and the gold rims and the various pieces of gold trim, the gold interior. You know, black and gold is a pretty handsome color combination. And of course, you got the blacked out rub strips, blacked out bumper. So it was kind of a menacing looking little car. It looked quite nice, but unfortunately, it really wasn't advertised all that well. And I can't really say that it helped Cimarron sales either. Like I was mentioning at the start of the video, many people don't even know that the Cimarron D'Oro even exists. And yet, it is, I think, overall a pretty cool vehicle. Now, unfortunately, the Cimarron D'Oro is a tough one to find pictures of the interior. They didn't make many, and there are none left. So here's one that was in a junkyard, but I wanted to at least show you what the interior looked like with this gold leather seating areas. This one even has a 5-speed manual transmission. I think this was the first Cadillac manual transmission in many, many decades. It was offered in the Cimarron. And, it was an interesting look. By the way, these seats that were in the Cimarron were also employed in the Eldorado Touring Coupe that was introduced in the early to mid-1980s. So they recycled the seats from that and used them in the larger Eldorado, too. And here's a picture of a later model year Cimarron D'Oro with, again, you still had the gold grille, you had the gold medallion, but they had toned it down a little bit, and they started offering more colors as the year went on, but still had that gold exterior package. This one sent hearts aflutter on various Facebook web pages several weeks ago. And, it's a stylish-looking car. You have the composite headlamps here, which the Cimarron would go to in 1987 and continue for 1988. And again, you have the unique sheet metal hood that it would get for the 1985 model year, continuing on through 1988 as well. So there were some unique Cimarron bits. And out back, you also got gold badging, a gold pinstripe around the car. Interestingly, the Cimarron badge was gold, but the V6 badge was not, nor was the Cadillac logo that was embedded in the tail lamps. Just the Cimarron badge was gold. So I'm surprised they didn't make them all gold. Would have looked a little better. Looks a little bit, interesting in this view. This car also has the locking fuel filler door because somebody was going to steal fuel out of your 12-gallon Cimarron tank. And I have to say, owning one of these Cimarrons with a similar locking fuel door, well, it feels like it's going to break just about every time you use it. But you have to put the key in and lock it. It won't let you take the key out in the unlocked position. Sure, I could take apart the mechanism, but for now, it's staying together. But like many 80s era GM things, you just have to be gentle with them over time because, now they're getting to be 40 years old and they weren't necessarily parts that held up all that well new. And while the badging out back wasn't necessarily optimal, one thing that you did get behind the front wheels was this beautiful D'Oro or D'Oro badge. Ooh, wow. To signify that you had paid extra money for your Cimarron, I believe the package was around $350 to $400. So if you want to understand what that is in today's terms, that's probably about $1,000 to $1,500 as a package. So it wasn't cheap, wasn't overly expensive, but when you consider the base price of the car, it was a decent fraction of the base price of the car. At least they gave you this badging to denote that you had paid that little extra money. Now, by the later years, the Cimarron D'Oro interior was kind of less gold and more tan. You have a two-tone tan interior here with the tan leather seats, then darker instrument panel and center console. Somebody has added the faux wood grain on the dash here. I don't know why. It doesn't look great, but that was a popular thing to do. This one also has the optional electronic instrument cluster as opposed to the analog gauges. And you have the Delco radio, the 5-band graphic equalizer. You could get a Delco Bose radio in your Cimarron in the latter years. I believe that was the first instance of using an alternate supplier's radio in a car was the Delco Bose Symphony sound system that came out in 1983 on the Cadillac Seville and Eldorado and then proliferated across the lineup. You also notice the HVAC controls there in the middle. It's push buttons. There's a little electric motor that moves the air door, not only the blend door between heat and air conditioning or cold air, but also between the modes. So where the air is coming out is also electrically operated. I'm not quite sure why GM did that, but I guess it's a little bit more luxurious than having the typical slider bar with the vacuum operation of those items, but they did. And by this point, as I mentioned, you could get a V6, a 2.8-liter, 125 horsepower V6 in your Cimarron, as well as some of the other J cars too. And it actually was a pretty good engine. This engine was introduced in the X cars in 1980 in a carbureted form. But by this point, it was fuel injected, and it was always fuel injected in the J cars. It was never carbureted. Made it a much better engine. The engine itself was fine with the carbureted variants, but the electronic feedback carburetors weren't all that great. And the multi-port injection on these was pretty good. So if you find one of these Cimarrons, you at least want to make sure that you, I would say, don't get a 1982 model with the 1.8 liter. That's just going to be anemic. The little 2-liter 4-cylinder isn't bad. The V6 is far, far better in many ways. And you're going to have a little kind of go-kart almost. It's amazing to me. I think one of the reasons why these didn't necessarily succeed in the market, aside from the fact that they truly were badge engineered, was that when you drive them, the Cimarrons really are a pretty stiff ride. They're not a cushy, plush ride. Whomever did the ride and handling tuning on these wanted a firm ride. And the Cimarrons, as a result, when you drive them, I think they probably upset the typical Cadillac customer, and the Cadillac customer thought that it was just because it was a cheap little car. Well, no, that was intentional to have it have a stiff suspension. And sometimes Cadillac did that. Cadillac always had a little bit stiffer, edgier suspension than some of the GM divisions, and I'm not quite sure why, because it wasn't necessarily a sporty car, but that was the Cadillac philosophy back at the time. So what do you think of the Cimarron D'Oro? Is that something that you would have bought back in the day, or you even think is cool today? Put a comment in the comment section and let me know. Thanks again for watching.